Hello and welcome back. It is now August 2025. Here in the darkest place on Earth, the night is deep. Whether you are just settling in or are already adrift on the edges of sleep, I am glad you have returned to this quiet place. Last time we met, we walked the dusty roads of ancient China with a rice merchant named Wu Lian, a man who learned that the truest economy is one built on trust. We left him in a time of fragile peace, having found his own kind of wealth. Tonight, our journey takes us even further back. We are going to the very cradle of civilization, to a land baked by the sun between two great rivers. A time when the first cities were rising from the earth, and the first laws were being etched onto tablets of clay. We are going to Mesopotamia. Our story tonight is guided by a modern quote from a man who mastered the art of real estate, a man named Glickman, who famously said, "The best investment on earth is earth." It is a simple, powerful idea. But is it true? Was it always true? Let's explore that thought through the life of a young man who inherited nothing but a small patch of dirt and a single, cryptic piece of advice. So get comfortable. Let the sounds of our modern world fade away. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to solve. Just allow your mind to travel. Together, let's go back. The best investment on earth is earth. Louis Glickman, let's travel back, not just through years or decades, but through millennia. Back past the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, to a time when the world was new, baked from river mud and blessed by a hot, unforgiving sun. The air here is different. It is thin and dry, and it tastes of dust and clay. It carries the scent of hot sun on river mud, of livestock, and of the smoke from thousands of cooking fires. This is the land of Sumer, the heart of Mesopotamia, around the year 2100 BCE. Before us, rising from the flat, fertile plains like a man-made mountain, is the great city of Ur. It is not a city of marble or glistening stone, but a sprawling, organic honeycomb of earth and brick, a labyrinth of narrow, winding streets bustling with the energy of civilization's dawn. And at its very heart, a monument to both piety and power, the Great Ziggurat dominates the skyline. It is a massive, stepped pyramid, a staircase for the gods themselves, dedicated to the city's patron, the moon god Nana. Its shadow stretches long across the city in the morning and the evening, a constant reminder of who is truly in charge. In this world, the gods are not distant, abstract concepts. They are the ultimate landlords. All of Earth, the Sumerians believed, was a gift from them, wrestled from the chaos of the primordial waters. Therefore, everything, every field, every canal, every date palm, truly belonged to the temple. The priests who served the gods in the cool, dark chambers of the ziggurat were not just spiritual guides. They were the city's bankers, its largest employers, its most powerful landowners, the administrators of a vast and complex economic engine. They were the power. But our story begins not in the grand temple, but in a small, windowless hut on the dusty edge of the city, 10 years earlier. It is a home made of the same materials as the ziggurat, sun-dried mud brick and reeds, but it holds none of its grandeur. Imagine a boy of 10. His name is Tiruk. He is kneeling on a worn reed mat beside his father. The air in the hut is thick, with the scent of sickness and the finality of things. His father, a simple farmer whose hands are as cracked and worn as the very earth he worked, is breathing in shallow, ragged gasps like a fish pulled from the great river. His life is ending. Then, with a final, trembling effort that seems to cost him everything, the father reaches under his sleeping mat. His fingers find a hard, rectangular object. He pulls it out and presses it into his son's small, bewildered hands. It is a tablet of baked clay, cool to the touch and surprisingly heavy. Its surface is covered in the small, neat, wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform, the world's first writing. The boy stares at the strange marks. He has seen them on temple walls and on the markers in the fields, but to him they are a mystery, a language of the powerful that he does not understand. His father leans close, his breath a dry whisper, like reeds rustling in the wind. "This is your inheritance, my son. The land. It is all I have to give." He pauses, a cough rattling in his chest. "One day, men will offer you silver for this tablet. They will tell you the silver is life, that it is freedom from a life of toil. Do not listen." His fingers, surprisingly strong, tighten on his son's hand, pressing the sharp edges of the tablet into the boy's soft palm. "They will see only clay, Tiruk. You must see the life within it. Do not sell the silver. Sell the sun and the water. The earth breathes, my son. Listen to it." And then his hand goes limp. The last breath leaves his body. And the boy, now an orphan, is left alone in the sudden, profound silence of the hut. He is clutching a piece of baked mud, a promise he doesn't yet understand that holds his entire future. 8 years have passed. The city of Ur has grown, its walls thicker, its markets more crowded. Tiruk is now a young man of 18. The orphan boy has survived, as life in the marshes and on the edges of the great city demands. But he has not thrived. Without land or a family name, his place in the rigid, stratified society of Ur is at the very bottom. He makes his meager living as a reed cutter. His day begins before the sun, when the air is still cool and a silver mist hangs over the river delta. He wades into the sprawling marshes, the cool mud sucking at his ankles. He spends his days among the towering reeds, a dense, vertical forest that rustles and whispers with a language of its own. The work is hard and often dangerous. The sharp edges of the reed leaves leave 100 tiny cuts on his hands and arms. He is always wary of the snakes that sleep in the reeds and the sharp shells that hide in the mud. By the end of the day, he carries a massive bundle of harvested reeds on his back, a green and dripping burden, to sell to the city's builders and basket weavers for a few small scraps of copper or a ration of barley. It is a life of endless labor, with no tomorrow that looks any different from today. As he toils, he looks towards the city, at the distant, massive shape of the ziggurat, a symbol of a world of power and plenty that feels as far away as the moon it honors. On the morning of his 18th birthday, the day he is legally recognized as a man, he does not go to the marshes. He washes the mud from his feet, puts on his cleanest woolen tunic, and takes the clay tablet his father gave him. It has been his one constant companion, a hard, silent reminder of a life he barely remembers. He walks through the city gates, past the market stalls where merchants are shouting the prices of wool and dates and copper pots, and makes his way towards the temple complex. He is heading for the archives, the Aduba, the city's memory, kept safe in a vast, dimly lit chamber near the base of the great ziggurat. The air inside is cool and still, and smells of dry clay and ancient dust. It is a city of the dead, but made of words. Thousands upon thousands of clay tablets are stacked in neat rows on dark wooden shelves that reach up into the shadows. They are the city's soul, its records of grain distribution, of legal disputes, of hymns to the gods, and of every plot of land owned by every family within its walls. He finds a junior scribe named Urnamu, a young man not much older than himself, with the dark smudged stains of wet clay on his fingers and a permanent expression of weary cynicism. He looks at Tiruk's rough clothes and calloused hands with disinterest. "What is it?" the scribe asks, his voice flat. Tiruk, his heart pounding, presents his father's tablet. "I have come to claim my inheritance. The scribe takes it with an audible sigh, annoyed at this interruption to his important work of copying trade manifests. He scans the wedge-shaped marks, his eyes moving with the practiced speed of a man who reads this language all day. He walks down an aisle, pulls a much larger, heavier master tablet from a shelf, and places the two side by side, comparing the seals and the inscriptions. He traces the marks with his finger, his lips moving silently. Then he grunts, a sound of genuine surprise. "It is legitimate," Urnamu says, handing the tablet back. He seems almost disappointed, as if he had hoped to find a forgery. A plot of 16 IKU, north of the city wall by the Uma Canal. It belonged to your father, Anzu, and his father before him. By the seal of the divine King Shulgi, it is yours. Tiruk feels a shock, a jolt of something he has never felt before. Ownership, a connection to the past, a claim on the future. He is no longer just Tiruk the reed cutter. He is Tiruk, son of Anzu, a landowner. He thanks the scribe and steps out of the archives, back into the blinding sunlight, feeling like a different person than the one who had entered. As his eyes adjust to the light, a man steps into his path, blocking his way. The man is older, well-fed, and dressed in a fine, fringed woolen cloak, despite the heat. He smiles a practiced, easy smile. "I am Akalam," the man says, his voice smooth. "A merchant of silver. I have dealings with the scribes. They are good sources of information. I hear a young man has come into his inheritance." He gestures to the tablet in Tiruk's hand. "A fine plot of land, I'm sure. But land is trouble, boy. It drinks your sweat in the day and your worries at night. It requires work, water rights, seeds, taxes to the temple. It is a hungry beast." He motions for Tiruk to follow him to a nearby stall selling beer made from fermented barley. He buys them both a cup. "Silver," Akalam continues, "is simple. It requires only a pouch. It is quiet. It does not need to be watered." He makes his offer. 10 silver rings, a very fair price for a plot I have not even seen. Enough to buy a small house in the city, to find a good wife, to live comfortably for many years. You would never have to touch a sharp-edged reed again for the rest of your life. He lays one of the silver rings on the table, a spiral of polished metal that glints in the sun. It is a fortune. It is an escape. The temptation is immense. Tiruk stares at the silver, imagining a life without the ache in his back and the mud between his toes. But then he hears his father's voice, a faint whisper from a decade ago. The earth breathes. Listen to it. "Thank you for your generous offer, merchant," Tiruk says, his own voice surprising him with its steadiness. "But I must see the land first." He spends the rest of the day walking to the plot. The journey takes him out of the bustling city, past the date groves and the vast, orderly barley fields owned by the temple. Finally, he reaches the marker stone described on his tablet. The land is exactly as Akalam had warned, a neglected, overgrown piece of earth choked with tough weeds and thorny scrub. But the soil, when he kneels and digs his hands into it, is dark and rich. The irrigation canal, promised on the tablet, runs right along its western edge, a ribbon of life-giving water. He picks up a handful of the soil, just as he had seen his father do 1,000 times. He crumbles it in his hand. He can feel the moisture, the coolness. He can feel the life within it. In that moment, he understands. The silver ring was just a cold, dead piece of metal. This was potential. This was tomorrow. He walks all the way back to the city and finds Akalam the merchant closing his stall for the evening. He politely and firmly refuses the offer. The merchant laughs, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "You are a fool, boy," he says, shaking his head. "The earth will break you. I will see you in a year, and you will be begging me for 5 rings, not 10. He turns and walks away into the crowded streets, convinced he has seen the last of the foolish reed-cutter Nin. was harder than he could have ever imagined. Ekalum's warning about the land being a hungry beast echoed in his mind during the first weeks, a taunting whisper on the hot wind.
Beast.
The sun in Mesopotamia is not a gentle friend. It is a merciless hammer in a brassy, cloudless sky. Tiruk's back, accustomed to the stoop of a reed cutter, now ached with the deeper, more profound pain of a farmer. His hands, tough from the reeds, were rubbed raw by the handle of his simple bronze-tipped hoe, and new blisters rose, broke and bled. He spent his first days in a silent, solitary war against the weeds. They were a stubborn, thorny army, their roots deep and tangled in the sun-baked earth. Every evening he would return to his small shelter, a simple lean-to he had built from the reeds he knew so well, and collapse onto his mat, his body a single throbbing ache. In those quiet moments of exhaustion, doubt was his only companion. Had he been a fool? The 10 silver rings could have given him a soft bed, a full belly. He had chosen this instead. Pain, loneliness, and a field that seemed to mock his efforts. But then, there would be small moments of grace. In the cool of the morning, as he dug a new irrigation channel, his hoe would strike a layer of dark, damp, cool soil that smelled of life. He would see the earthworms, a sign of the land's health, and he would feel a surge of connection, a feeling that this earth was not his enemy, but his partner. He would remember his father's words, "The earth breathes," and he would feel its slow, steady rhythm under his feet. His nearest neighbor was an old, wiry farmer named Ibi, a man who worked a nearby plot of barley owned by the temple. Ibi would watch Tiruk with squinting, skeptical eyes. "Flax?" The old man grunted one morning, spitting a stream of chewed barley onto the ground. "The gods demand barley for the temple bread and the temple beer. A man can live on barley. You will starve chasing a weaver's dream, boy." Tiruk would only nod politely and continue his work. He knew the old farmer was speaking the common wisdom of their time. But Tiruk was not interested in the common wisdom. He was interested in a gap he had seen in the world, Nun. During his years as a reed cutter, he had spent his evenings not in the beer halls, but wandering the city's districts, an invisible orphan observing the machinery of Ur's economy. He had spent hours in the weaver's quarter, watching the women work their looms. He listened to them complain. The flax they used, brought by long, slow caravans from the distant lands of the West, was expensive. The stalks were often dry, brittle, and produced a coarse, rough thread. He saw the finished product in the markets, the fine, almost translucent linen garments worn by the priests on festival days, or by the wives of rich merchants. He saw the immense distance in value between the raw, imported stalk and the finished, luxurious cloth. And in that distance, he saw his opportunity. He sold the last of his reed-cutting tools and his one good cloak. With the small amount of copper he received, he did not buy more food or a better shelter. He bought a single small bag of flax seeds from a traveling merchant. It was his all-in moment, a complete commitment to his risky idea. The day he planted the seeds was a quiet, personal ritual. He walked the furrows of his newly cleared field, letting the tiny, glossy seeds fall from his hand into the dark earth, whispering a prayer not to the grand gods of the ziggurat, but to the spirit of his father and to the breathing soil itself. He spent the next months in a state of constant, vigilant care. He guarded his water rights at the canal, clearing away debris to ensure a steady flow. He patrolled his field from dawn till dusk, chasing away hungry birds. He watched the weather, his heart in his throat, with every passing cloud that failed to bring rain. And then, one morning he saw it. A faint, green haze across his field. The flax was sprouting. The earth had answered him. The field grew into a sea of delicate, slender stalks, each topped with a small, sky-blue flower. It was beautiful. His first harvest was small, but the stalks were tall, strong, and full of life. He carried a bundle to the city market, his heart full of pride, but the grain merchant scoffed at him. "What is this? Tall weeds?" one said. "Give me barley, boy, something a man can eat." They offered him a pittance, less than he would have gotten for a bundle of common reeds. Dejected, he was packing up his stall when a young woman approached. Her hands were stained with indigo and madder root, the marks of her trade. Her eyes were sharp and critical. She did not look at him. She looked at the flax. She was a weaver. Her name was Inanna. She picked up one of his stalks without asking, snapping it between her fingers, testing its strength. She pulled at the fibers, feeling their texture. "This is good flax," she admitted, her voice cautious and professional. "The fibers are long, better than the imported stalks. But it is useless like this. It is just a weed." Tiruk, tired and frustrated from a day of rejection, met her challenge. "Then what makes it useful?" "Skill," she replied simply, her eyes finally meeting his. She explained the long, difficult process. The retting, where the stalks had to be soaked in water for weeks to rot the woody core. The scutching and hackling, a violent process of beating and combing to separate the raw fibers. And finally, the spinning, the delicate, patient work of twisting the fibers into a single, continuous thread. "My skill," she finished, her gaze unwavering. They spent the next hour in a tense but respectful negotiation, two young artisans from the bottom of the city's ladder, recognizing the quality in each other's work. They struck a bargain, sealing it not with a contract, but with a simple, shared look of understanding. He would provide her with all of his flax. She, in her small workshop in the weaver's district, would turn it into the finest linen thread. They would split the profits. They needed each other. The venture was a staggering success. The linen thread Inanna spun from Tiruk's flax was unlike anything seen in Ur. It was strong, yet soft, with a natural, silvery sheen. Their first big break came when the wife of a wealthy copper merchant saw the thread and commissioned enough to make a new gown for a festival. The garment was so beautiful, so much finer than the imported linen, that it became the talk of the city's elite. Soon they had enough silver to buy their own looms, and Inanna began weaving finished bolts of cloth. Tiruk, meanwhile, returned to the temple archives. He went to Ur-Nammu, the scribe, and paid him with a generous length of their finest linen. In exchange, the scribe spent several evenings teaching Tiruk the basics of cuneiform. It was another form of hard labor. Tiruk would sit for hours, pressing a reed stylus into a tablet of wet clay, his large, clumsy farmer's hand struggling to form the small, precise, wedge-shaped marks. But he learned. He created his own simple ledgers, tracking their inventory, their sales, their growing profits. He was no longer just working in his enterprise. He was working on it. A year after he had refused Akalam's offer, Tiruk used his profits to hire 2 other landless orphans, giving them work in his field and a share of the harvest. He saw the same look of disbelief and gratitude in their eyes that he himself had felt. His small plot of earth was now the heart of a thriving business. It was producing not just a crop, but a community. For a brief, wonderful time, as he stood at the edge of his field, the setting sun casting a golden light on the blue flowers of the flax, his future felt as bright and clean as the linen bleaching in the Mesopotamian Sunnian Nun. Success in the city of Ur was a double-edged sword. On one hand, Tiruk's enterprise brought him a kind of wealth he had never known. Respect.
Greetings, Tiruk.
He was no longer the landless reed
to you.
cutter, the invisible orphan on the
May
city's
your day
margins.
be prosperous.
He was now Tiruk the Flaxmaster, the quiet founder of Ur's first and only linen guild. He had a proper stall in the main market, no longer a dusty bundle on the ground, but a shaded space where the fine, cream-colored bolts of linen cloth were stacked like treasured scrolls. We
By
can see
order of
him
the high
there,
priest,
in the
all
bustling heart of the
able-bodied men
city's
are to
commerce.
report for the king's
A
new
servant
levy.
for a noblewoman haggles respectfully for a bolt of the finest, almost translucent linen, destined for a new festival gown. A copper merchant, his face weathered from the caravan trails, buys a dozen bolts, knowing he can trade them in the distant mountains for a handsome profit. Even a junior priest, his face young and earnest, stops by to admire a length of pure white linen, the kind required for temple robes, marveling at its quality. And with every transaction, whispers followed. "Where does such a fine material come from?" a traveler would ask. And the answer would ripple through the market. "It is from the fields of Tiruk, the orphan boy who refused the silver." His name, once unknown, was now a story, a minor legend of the marketplace. But success also brought attention, and in Ur, all attention, like the water in the canals, eventually flowed upwards, towards the great ziggurat at the city's heart. High within that man-made mountain, in a cool, dark chamber that smelled of cedarwood and old clay, High Priest Lugal sat. He was the chief administrator of the Temple of Nana, a man whose world was one of absolute order. His universe was contained in the meticulous cuneiform records that his scribes presented to him daily, massive clay tablets detailing the city's lifeblood in neat, wedge-shaped marks. He saw the reports of the barley tithes, the wool production from the temple's flocks, the silver tariffs from the city gates. One afternoon, a scribe pointed out an anomaly. A significant and growing amount of silver tax was coming from the weavers' district. It was good for the city's coffers, but its source was irregular. It was all tied to a raw material, flax, that was not coming from the temple's own lands or trade caravans. Lugal stared at the tablet, his brow furrowed. He saw this not as a welcome bonus, but as a disruption. "Prosperity that does not flow from the god's house," he said to his acolyte, his voice calm and certain as a prayer, "is a stream that diverts the river from its proper course. All streams must feed the great river. It must be brought back into alignment." He did not see a young man's hard-won success. He saw an untamed economic force, a private enterprise growing in the shadow of the temple, and it offended his sense of divine and administrative order. A week later, a city crier, flanked by temple guards, made a grand proclamation in the market square. His voice boomed, silencing the haggling of the merchants. To honor the moon god Nana for a recent victory against the Elamite raiders, the temple would undertake its most ambitious project in a generation. A new complex of sacred storehouses, workshops for the temple weavers, and gardens for the gods would be built. The crowd murmured in awe and piety. Tiruk and Inanna were in the market, listening. At first, the news felt distant, another grand project of the powerful. But then the crier specified the location chosen by the gods themselves through the divination of the priests. "And this holy work shall be built upon the blessed and fertile lands to the north of the city, along the banks of the Uma Canal." A cold dread, sharp and sudden, cut through the warmth of Tiruk's success. He knew with absolute certainty what that meant. He looked at his flourishing fields, the blue flowers nodding in the breeze, and saw them not as a source of pride, but as a target. The official visit came 3 days later. A senior priest from the temple, a man named Enmerkar, whose white robe was of the finest linen, arrived at Tiruk's small home. He did not come to the fields or the workshop, but to the house, making the intrusion a personal one. Inanna stood silently beside Tiruk as they greeted him. The priest, Enmerkar, did not threaten or shout. His voice was smooth, his manner polite, and that made him all the more terrifying. He began with praise. "Your work has brought honor to this land, Tiruk, son of Anzu," he said, his eyes sweeping over their modest but well-kept home. "You have made this soil worthy of the gods' attention. You should be proud." Tiruk simply nodded, waiting. "The gods have seen the prosperity you have cultivated," Enmerkar continued, And now, they wish for this land to be returned to them, to be used for a sacred purpose that will bring blessings upon all of for 1,000 years. Then came the offer. The temple, in its generosity, would compensate Tiruk for his troubles, so he could start a new life within the city walls. A generous gift, the priest called it. 10 silver rings. The sound of the words hung in the air. Tiruk felt a flash of hot anger. The insult so profound it almost made him laugh. It was the exact amount Akalam the merchant had offered for a worthless, weed-choked plot years ago. It was a clear, deliberate message. All his work, all the sweat and risk, all the value he had created from nothing, meant nothing. The land had a price, and it was a price set by the powerful, not by the man who worked it. He felt Inanna's hand gently touch his arm, a silent plea for caution. He took a breath, mastering his anger. "I am grateful for the temple's offer, honored one," Tiruk said, his voice a model of calm respect. "But this land was given to my family by the great King Shulgi. It is my only inheritance." He brought out his father's tablet, the baked clay deed, and held it out. "I cannot sell it." The priest smiled, a thin, dismissive smile that did not reach his eyes. He did not even glance at the tablet. "A man's tablet is a worthy thing," he said softly. "It records the world of men. But the will of the gods is written on the sky itself. The sky brings the sun that can wither your crops, Tiruk. The river brings the water that can be withheld. It is wise to live in harmony with these great forces." He bowed his head slightly, turned and left. The threat was unspoken, but it hung in the air, as heavy and oppressive as the summer heat. The battle lines were drawn. It was Tiruk's simple clay deed, a promise from a dead king, versus the infinite unwritten authority of the living gods. Nen. The temple did not fight with swords and spears. Its weapons were far more subtle and far more suffocating. It fought with the quiet, crushing weight of the system itself. The squeeze began the very next day. Tiruk arrived at his fields at dawn and saw it immediately. The small channel that fed his land, the one that branched off the main Uma Canal, was nearly dry. Only a pathetic trickle of brown water seeped into his irrigation ditches. He ran to the main canal. There, he found the canal master, a stern, temple-appointed official, overseeing a crew of workers who were redirecting the main flow of water away from Tiruk's channel and towards the vast, sprawling barley fields owned by the temple. Tiruk confronted him, his voice tight with a controlled anger. "Master Girsu, my land has a water right guaranteed by royal seal." The canal master refused to meet his eyes, staring instead at the flowing water as if mesmerized. "The drought is affecting everyone, Tiruk," he said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "The high priest has decreed that the gods' own barley fields which feed the city must take priority. My hands are tied by this sacred duty." He did not need to say more. It was a lie they both understood. The temple was beginning to choke his land. The second attack came that afternoon, aimed at Inanna. A tax collector, a man with the cold, calculating eyes of an abacus, arrived at her workshop in the Weaver's district. He was not aggressive. He was meticulously, pedantically polite. He spent an hour inspecting her looms, her clay pots of dye, the bundles of raw flax. Then, he unrolled a small tablet and made a series of calculations with a stylus. "A new tithe has been decreed by the temple," he announced to the room of silent, nervous weavers. "To honor the sacred craft, a tax must be paid on the wearing of the spindles." Inanna stared at him, incredulous. "A tax on the wearing of the spindles? That makes no sense. The wood is already taxed." The collector simply shrugged. "The temple's wisdom is not for us to question. The tax is 2 shekels of copper per weaver per month. It is due by the next full moon." He made his notes, sealed the tablet, and left. leaving a chill in the small, warm workshop. The message was clear. Anyone associated with Tiruk, anyone who dared to help his enterprise succeed, would be bled dry by 1,000 tiny, legalistic cuts. That night, in their small home, the weight of the temple's power felt like a physical presence, a pressure on the very walls. Their workers were growing nervous, their suppliers hesitant, their thriving business was being slowly, methodically strangled. "Perhaps we should take the silver, Tiruk," Inanna said, her voice barely a whisper. The fire in her eyes was dampened by fear. "We cannot fight the ziggurat itself. It is the center of the world. It will crush us." Tiruk looked at her, at the fear that was replacing the proud confidence he so admired. He looked at his own hands, calloused and strong from working the earth. And then his gaze fell upon the tools of his new trade, laid out on a small table, not a hoe and a sickle, but a wet clay tablet, a bowl of water, and a sharpened reed stylus. In that moment of despair, a flicker of clarity came to him. The temple's power wasn't just in its priests or its guards, it was in its records. Its authority was written on clay. Every rule, every tax, every decision was a mark on a tablet. He could not fight their guards or their priests, but maybe, just maybe, he could fight them with their own language. "They fight with whispers and rules written on clay," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "So will we. We will not build a wall of brick to protect us. We will build a fortress of tablets. We will record everything." His new strategy began that night. He started by fighting the water restriction. He found his father's deed and carefully copied the inscription about the royal water rights onto a new small tablet. He presented it to the canal master every single morning, a quiet, persistent act of defiance. He didn't argue or shout. He simply presented the record. He did the same with the tax collector, presenting tablets that showed the taxes he had already paid, questioning the legal basis for the new spindle tax. He was becoming a nuisance, a small, stubborn rock in the smoothly flowing river of their bureaucracy. But he knew a shield was not enough. He needed a sword. He needed the tablet that Urnamu had told him about, the original royal grant, Ninin. He took the 2 finest bolts of linen they had, the kind of cloth a king might wear, and went to the temple archives late one evening, long after the petitioners and senior scribes had gone home. He found Urnamu alone, his face weary in the flickering lamplight. The air in the vast library was cool and still, smelling of 1,000 years of dry clay. "This is dangerous, Tiruk," the scribe whispered, looking nervously towards the entrance. "I know," Tiruk replied, unrolling the linen. It seemed to glow in the dim light. "This is not a bribe. It is payment for a great skill, a payment for your knowledge, which is the most valuable thing in this city." The scribe looked at the linen, then at Tiruk. He saw not a foolish farmer, but a determined man. His cynical exterior cracked. As a keeper of records, he had a deep, secret respect for the truth written on the tablets. He agreed to help. For 3 nights they searched. It was a monumental task. The chamber was a city of the silent, shelf after shelf of tablets holding the city's soul. They worked by the light of a single oil lamp, their shadows dancing like giants on the walls. Urnamu, his professional pride now fully engaged in the puzzle, led them through the labyrinthine cataloging system. On the 3rd night, in a dusty, forgotten corner of the archives reserved for the decrees of long-dead kings, he found it. It was a large ceremonial tablet, made of a finer, reddish clay than the others. The cuneiform was older, more elegant, and at the bottom was the seal of King Shulgi, a deep, clear impression in the clay. Urnamu traced the inscription with a trembling finger. "By the beard of Enki," he whispered in awe. "It is, as the records said, a royal grant. The land and its water, guaranteed by the king's divine authority." "They won't like this, Tiruk. The king's seal is older and harder than the temple's. Tiruk now held his sword. He did not go to the temple. He went to the king's magistrate and, using the authority of the royal grant tablet, he forced a formal hearing before the city's council of elders. The hearing was held in a grand open-air chamber at the foot of the ziggurat. The elders, old, powerful men with long, graying beards, sat on carved wooden chairs, their faces impassive. High Priest Lugal spoke first. His voice was magnificent, a resonant baritone that filled the chamber. He spoke of piety, of tradition, of the sacred duty of all citizens to serve the gods who had given them everything. He painted Tiruk as a selfish, misguided individual, a man who, in his greed, would stand in the way of a holy project that would bring blessings and prosperity to all of Ur. He was convincing. The elders nodded gravely. Then it was Tiruk's turn. He stood before them, a simple man in a plain woolen robe. He was not an orator. His voice was quiet, the voice of a farmer who speaks to his fields. He did not engage in a theological debate. He simply, methodically, presented his evidence. He laid down the great, red tablet of the royal grant. A murmur went through the council as they recognized the seal. He laid down his father's deed, proving his lineage. And then he began to lay down his own smaller tablets, his ledgers. Honored elders, he began, his voice clear and steady. The high priest speaks of what is best for the gods and for the city of Ur. I wish to speak of this as well. He held up one of his ledgers. This tablet shows that my land, this small plot, now supports 12 families, where before it supported only weeds. This tablet shows that the silver taxes paid by our weavers in the last year alone is greater than the tax from any 3 of the temple's barley fields combined. And this tablet, he said, holding up the last one, is a list of the merchants from distant cities who now come to Ur not just for our barley, but for our linen, bringing new silver and new trade to our gates. He looked directly at Lugal, then back to the council. To make the city of Ur strong is to honor the king. And to make our city prosperous, to create work for its people, and bring wealth to its markets, is the greatest tribute we can offer to the gods. He fell silent. He had not argued. He had presented facts. He had used the temple's own language of records and accounts to tell a different, more powerful story. The elders sat in stunned silence. They were left with 2 conflicting, powerful truths: the divine will of the temple and the undeniable, documented prosperity of a new enterprise. The chamber was quiet, the only sound the distant whisper of the wind. The Council of Elders did not deliver their verdict immediately. To do so would have been to act with haste, an insult to the gravity of the matter. For 3 days, a tense quiet settled over the city of Ur. Tiruk and Inanna spent the time in a state of suspended reality. They oversaw the work in the fields and the workshops, but their minds were elsewhere, waiting. The weavers worked with a nervous energy, the clacking of their looms sounding louder than ever in the quiet streets. High Priest Lugal retreated into the ziggurat, and the temple gates remained closed to all but the highest officials. On the morning of the 4th day, a city magistrate, flanked by 2 guards, arrived at Tiruk's home. He was not a temple priest, but a secular official of the king. He carried a large, freshly baked clay tablet. He read the council's decision aloud, his voice formal and clear, ringing out in the quiet courtyard. The council, in its wisdom, has considered the matter of the land of Tiruk, son of Anzu. It is found that the royal grant of the divine King Shulgi is ancient, and its seal is unbroken. The authority of a king is the foundation of our city. Therefore, the land shall remain with the lineage of Anzu, its rights to the water of the Uma Canal affirmed. Tiruk felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. He reached out and grasped Inanna's hand, her fingers cold as stone. He had won. But the magistrate was not finished. However, he continued, his tone shifting, The piety and the prosperity of the city are one and the same. The gods have clearly shown favor to this land, and it is right that they receive their due. Therefore, the enterprise of the flaxmaster Tiruk will henceforth provide a sacred tithe to the great temple of Nana. He read the final line, 100 bolts of the finest bleached white linen, to be delivered on the first day of each harvest season, to be used in the sacred rites that protect our city. So the council has decreed. It was a masterful compromise. Tiruk had won the right to his land, but the temple had won a perpetual, undeniable tribute. It was a tax paid not in silver, but in the very material that had been the source of the conflict. It was a victory for both, and therefore a true resolution. Tiruk bowed his head, a deep and genuine gesture of acceptance. "The council is wise," he said. "We will be honored to provide for the temple." The first delivery of the tithe was a significant event. It was not a tax payment made in the shadows, but a formal public ceremony. Tiruk and Inanna, dressed in their finest clothes, led a small, dignified procession of their workers from their workshop to the foot of the great ziggurat. They carried the 100 bolts of snow-white linen, the cloth so fine it seemed to capture the sunlight. High Priest Lugal met them at the temple gates. The two men, the priest and the farmer, stood before each other. There was no warmth between them, but there was a new, hard-won respect. Lugal accepted the tithe on behalf of the gods, and Tiruk, in turn, was given the temple's formal, written blessing for his enterprise. The war was over. In the years that followed, with the temple's opposition replaced by a formal partnership, the linen trade of Ur flourished. The weavers worked without fear. The canal's water flowed freely, and the guild that Tiruk and Inanna founded became a powerful and respected part of the city's economy. Tiruk even saw Akalam, the silver merchant, in the market one day. The merchant, who now bought linen from Tiruk to sell to his caravan partners, simply looked at him and gave a short, grudging nod. "You were a wiser fool than I thought, reed cutter," he said, before disappearing into the crowd. The seasons turned. The years passed. The city of Ur grew richer, and the story of the orphan who fought the temple with clay tablets became a quiet legend,
into every thread,
a tale told by weavers at their looms and by scribes in the beer halls. Let us look in one last time. We see Tiruk now in his middle age. The lean, desperate boy is gone, replaced by a man of quiet confidence. He is not a king or a high priest, but a pillar of his community, a master of his craft, respected for his integrity and his fair dealings. He and Inanna have 3 children, their laughter filling the small courtyard of their home. One afternoon, we see him with his eldest son in his office, the room where he once kept his simple, desperate ledgers. Now, the shelves are filled with the neat, orderly records of a thriving guild. He is teaching the boy how to read the small, wedge-shaped marks on a tablet. But the text is not a sacred hymn or a king's epic. It is a business ledger. "Every mark is a promise, my son," Tiruk says, his voice gentle as he guides the boy's hand. "To the person who buys our cloth, and to the person who weaves it, that is the foundation of all true wealth." He is passing on his life's great lesson. He often still walks out to that first plot of land, which his guild now keeps as a place of honor. He kneels, just as he did as a boy, and crumbles the dark, rich soil in his hands. He thinks of his father. The silver had been a promise of an easy life, an ending to his struggle. But the earth, he now understood, had been a promise of a future, a beginning for a community. It breathed. It gave back what you gave to it, 100-fold. The best investment on earth was earth. It was true in the sun-baked plains of ancient Sumer, and it is true now. The form of our deeds may have changed from clay to paper to digital code, the nature of our work from the field to the factory to the keyboard. But the principle remains. The earth and the honest labor, the skill, the vision we pour into it, is the source of all true and lasting value. Now you can let that thought go. Let the story of Tiruk and his tablets of clay fade. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing left to do, only rest. Sleep well.